Armory later that night. Dimly lit, rows of weapons glint faintly under the sparse light. Elizabeth, now alone, meticulously checks her gear. The sound of boots echoes faintly. She tenses, but doesn't look up.
Henry.
Softly. You shouldn't be here alone. Elizabeth exhales, relaxing as Henry steps out of the shadows. Elizabeth, glancing at him. You're the one breaking protocol by sneaking around, Captain. Henry, smiling faintly. I'm just making sure you're safe. He moves closer, his gaze darting to the door as he speaks. Henry, quietly.
Reeves suspects something.
I can see it in the way he watches you. Elizabeth, calmly. Reeves is a gossip, not a threat. We just need to be careful. Henry places a hand on the table, leaning in.
Henry.
I keep asking myself if this is worth risking everything we've worked for. Elizabeth looks up, her expression unwavering. Elizabeth, you already know the answer to that. Before Henry can respond, the faint hum of voices grows louder outside the armory. Both straighten, their professional masks slipping into place. The door opens, and Major Crawford, 40s, authoritative, sharp-eyed, strides in, accompanied by Corporal Reeves. Crawford, firmly. Captain Henry. Lieutenant Elizabeth. I didn't realize we had a late-night strategy session. Henry, stiffly. Just ensuring everything's in order for tomorrow's drills, sir. Crawford narrows his eyes, sensing the tension in the room. Crawford, to Reeves. Corporal, finish your inventory report and get some rest. Reeves salutes and exits reluctantly, his curious glance lingering on Elizabeth as he goes. Crawford's gaze sweeps between Henry and Elizabeth, his voice low but deliberate. Crawford, this isn't the first time I've noticed the two of you close. It's starting to raise questions. Henry, defensively. Sir, I assure you. Crawford, interrupting. Save it, Captain. Whatever's going on, you'd better hope it doesn't interfere with the chain of command.
Dismissed.
Crawford walks out, leaving Henry and Elizabeth in tense silence. Elizabeth sits on the edge of her cot, tying her boots. Across the room, Reeves loiters, pretending to check his gear. Reeves, casually. Late night, Lieutenant? Elizabeth glances at him, her expression unreadable. Elizabeth, tersely. Do you have a point, Corporal? Reeves smirks, leaning against the wall. Reeves, just seems like you and the captain have been spending a lot of time together. People notice things, you know. Elizabeth stands, her tone sharp. Elizabeth, what people notice is usually none of their business. Keep that in mind, Corporal. Reeves straightens under her glare, but doesn't back down entirely. Reeves, of course, Lieutenant. Just offering some friendly advice. He walks away, leaving Elizabeth's jaw tight with frustration. Henry oversees drills, his stern voice cutting through the air as soldiers practice maneuvers. Elizabeth, across the field, leads another group. Their gazes meet briefly, a flicker of unspoken connection passing between them before they focus back on their duties. Crawford observes from a distance, his sharp eyes noting the silent exchange. Beside him, Reeves lingers, whispering something to the Major. Crawford's expression hardens. Crawford sits behind a desk, a file open in front of him. Henry stands at attention, his expression calm but guarded. Crawford, you've been one of my best officers, Henry. But there's a line between personal and professional, and it's my job to ensure it isn't crossed. Henry remains silent, his fists clenched behind his back. Crawford, I need to know, Captain, is there something going on between you and Lieutenant Elizabeth? Henry hesitates, the weight of his decision clear in his eyes. Henry, quietly, with all due respect, sir, my personal life doesn't affect my ability to lead. Crawford leans forward, his tone icy. Crawford, you'd better hope it stays that way. Because if I find any reason to believe otherwise, there will be consequences. Elizabeth sits at her small desk, staring at a crumpled letter in her hand. It's a transfer order, and signed but ominously addressed to her. A knock at the door startles her. Elizabeth, quietly.
Come in.
The door creaks open, and Henry steps inside, closing it softly behind him.
Henry,
whispering, "You shouldn't leave your door unlocked." Elizabeth, smirking faintly, "You shouldn't be here." Henry moves closer, his expression serious.
Henry.
"Crawford cornered me today. He knows something's going on." Elizabeth tosses the transfer order onto the desk. "Elizabeth, you're not the only one under scrutiny. This showed up in my mail tonight." Henry picks up the letter, reading it quickly. Henry, angrily, "A transfer? They're trying to separate us." Elizabeth, "They can't prove anything yet. But Reeves, he's been sniffing around, and he's smart enough to connect the dots." Henry runs a hand through his hair, pacing the small room. "Henry, we can't keep this up, Elizabeth. If Crawford or anyone else gets solid evidence." Elizabeth, standing firm, "I knew the risks when this started, Henry. I'm not running from it now. Are you?" Henry stops, turning to her.
Henry.
Softly, "Never." He steps closer, his hand brushing against hers.
Henry.
"But we need to be smarter. If they transfer you, I won't be able to protect you." Elizabeth meets his gaze, her resolve unwavering. "Elizabeth, then we find a way to make sure that doesn't happen." Crawford sits behind his desk, reviewing documents. Elizabeth knocks and enters, her demeanor composed but determined. Crawford, "Lieutenant, to what do I owe the visit?" Elizabeth, steadily, "I received word of a potential transfer, sir. I wanted to confirm if it's official." Crawford leans back, studying her. Crawford, offhandedly, "Just preliminary discussions. Nothing has been decided yet." Elizabeth nods, masking her frustration. Elizabeth, "I'd like to formally request to remain with my current unit, sir. I believe my familiarity with the team and current operations ensures the best outcomes." Crawford raises an eyebrow, intrigued by her boldness. Crawford, "Noted. But let me be clear, Lieutenant, if I sense any disruptions within the chain of command, I won't hesitate to make changes." Understood? Elizabeth, crisp. "Understood, sir." The sun sets over the barracks, casting long shadows. Henry and Elizabeth stand at opposite ends of the training field, overseeing their respective squads. Reeves lingers near a group of soldiers, his sharp eyes flickering between the two officers. He smirks to himself before slipping away. Reeves' quarters night. Reeves sits at his desk, scribbling in a small notebook. The faint sound of footsteps outside his door catches his attention. Suddenly, the door bursts open, and Henry strides in, his expression dark.
Reeves.
Surprised. "Captain?" Henry closes the door firmly behind him.
Henry.
Quietly menacing. "We need to talk, Corporal." Reeves straightens, his grin fading. Reeves. "About what, sir?" Henry steps closer, his tone icy. "Henry, I know you've been spreading rumors. Watching Lieutenant Elizabeth and me." Reeves shifts uncomfortably, but tries to maintain his composure. Reeves. "I'm just doing my job, sir. Reporting what I see." Henry. "Leaking baseless speculation isn't your job, Corporal. It's a violation of trust and protocol." Reeves falters, sensing the weight behind Henry's words. Reeves, nervously, "I didn't mean any harm." Henry leans in, his voice low and firm. Henry, "Then stop acting like you're the barracks gossip column. If you think you've seen something, report it through the proper channels. Otherwise, stay out of my way." Henry steps back, his gaze hard. Henry, "This is your only warning." Reeves swallows hard, nodding as Henry leaves the room. Henry and Elizabeth meet under the cover of darkness. Henry, quietly, "I confronted Reeves. He'll back off for now, but Crawford won't." Elizabeth nods, her jaw tight. Elizabeth, "Then we give them nothing to find. We stick to protocol, no more late-night meetings, no more risks." Henry hesitates, the thought of distance weighing on him. Henry, "And us?" Elizabeth steps closer, her voice soft but firm. Elizabeth, "We survive this.
Together."
Henry nods, their shared determination evident. Crawford, dismissing. "You've brought me nothing but speculation, Corporal. If you want to prove your worth, bring me evidence, not rumors." Reeves nods, leaving the room. Crawford leans back, steepling his fingers.
Crawford.
muttering to himself, "Let's see how long this house of cards holds." Major Harper's gaze flickers between Elizabeth and Henry, sensing the unspoken tension, but choosing not to comment. "Harper, time is of the essence. We move at dawn. Make it count." He slams the table lightly with his palm, signaling the end of the meeting. Officers begin to rise and gather their documents. Elizabeth remains seated, studying the map, while Henry lingers near the doorway. Henry waits until the corridor empties. Elizabeth finally emerges, clutching a stack of papers. Their eyes meet again, but this time, there's no one around to witness the charged moment. "Henry." Low voice. "Liz, we need to talk." Elizabeth stiffens, her professional mask still firmly in place. "Elizabeth, this isn't the time, Henry." "Henry, it's never the time with you. But we can't keep avoiding this." Elizabeth exhales sharply, glancing around to ensure they're alone. "Elizabeth." Quietly, "I'm not avoiding it.
I'm doing my job.
You should try it sometime." Henry steps closer, his tone softening.
Henry.
"You think I don't care? About you? About us?" Elizabeth falters for a moment, her resolve wavering. "Elizabeth," whispering, "that's not the point. You made your choice, Henry. And I made mine. Now we have a mission to focus on." She brushes past him, leaving Henry staring after her, frustration etched on his face. Outskirts of camp night. Elizabeth sits alone near the edge of the camp, her eyes scanning the horizon. The glow of the distant enemy outpost flickers faintly in the distance. She clutches a locket around her neck, a simple gold pendant with a small photograph inside. Footsteps crunch behind her. She doesn't need to turn around to know who it is. "Henry. Couldn't sleep either?" "Elizabeth." Sarcastic, "Guess we've got that in common at least." Henry sits beside her, careful to leave some space, but close enough to feel her presence. "Henry. I never wanted to hurt you." "Elizabeth." Looking ahead, "And yet you did." Silence falls between them, heavy with regret and unresolved feelings. "Henry. I thought if I kept things professional, it'd be easier. For both of us." Elizabeth turns to him, her eyes glinting with emotion in the dim light. "Elizabeth. Easier? Watching you risk your life every day, pretending like it doesn't matter? Like we don't matter? That's easier?" Henry opens his mouth to respond, but an explosion in the distance cuts him off. Both of them snap to attention, their personal conflict shoved aside as they focus on the mission. Elizabeth, to herself, looks like dawn came early. Eastern Ridge, early morning. The unit is in position, crouched behind rocks and sparse vegetation. Elizabeth and Henry are stationed together, their tension now replaced by sharp focus. "Henry. Quietly, you were right about this ridge." "Elizabeth. Let's hope it's enough." Through her binoculars, Elizabeth spots enemy patrols moving in their direction. She signals to Henry, and he relays the message to the others. "Henry, we'll hold them off here. You take the left flank and..." "Elizabeth."
No.
"We do this together." Their eyes meet again, this time with mutual understanding.
Henry.
Softly, "Together, then." As the enemy approaches, Elizabeth and Henry prepare to face the fight side by side, their unresolved emotions fueling their determination. Later battlefield. Gunfire erupts. Elizabeth and Henry move with practiced precision, covering each other and taking down threats with seamless coordination. The intensity of the fight mirrors the storm of emotions swirling between them. At one point, Henry shoves Elizabeth out of the way of an incoming grenade, shielding her with his own body. Elizabeth, angry and panicked. "What the hell, Henry? Are you trying to get yourself killed?"
Henry.
Smiling despite the danger. "Can't let anything happen to you." Their eyes lock amidst the chaos, a silent promise exchanged before they dive back into the fray. The battlefield is eerily quiet now, the sounds of gunfire replaced by distant echoes and the faint rustle of wind. The unit regroups, weary but victorious. Elizabeth surveys the scene, her eyes scanning for Henry. She spots him near a cluster of rocks, tending to a wounded soldier. She approaches, her voice tinged with both relief and irritation. "Elizabeth, you could have been killed back there." Henry doesn't look up immediately, tying a makeshift bandage around the soldier's arm. Henry, and you think I'd just stand by and let something happen to you? Elizabeth crosses her arms, frustration bubbling beneath her calm exterior. Elizabeth, you can't keep doing this, throwing yourself in harm's way like you're invincible. Henry finally meets her gaze, his expression soft but determined.
Henry.
I'm not invincible, Liz. But if it's a choice between me or you, I'll make the same decision every time. The words hang heavy between them. Elizabeth's resolve falters, her emotions threatening to break through the surface. Elizabeth. Softer, you don't get to make that choice for me. Henry steps closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Henry. Maybe not. But I'll always protect you, whether you like it or not. Elizabeth's eyes shimmer with unshed tears, but before she can respond, Major Harper's voice cuts through the tension. Harper. Lieutenant.
Captain.
They turn to see Harper approaching, his expression unreadable. Harper.
Good work out there.
But we've got a bigger problem. He gestures to a battered radio one of the soldiers is holding. Harper. Intel just came through. The enemy's planning a counterattack, and they're bringing reinforcements. We've got less than 12 hours to prepare. The weight of the news settles over them like a storm cloud. Elizabeth straightens, slipping back into her professional demeanor. Elizabeth. What's the plan, sir? Harper. We dig in. But we'll need scouts to assess their movements. Volunteers? Before Harper can finish, both Henry and Elizabeth step forward simultaneously. Henry and Elizabeth. I'll go. They glance at each other, a flicker of exasperation mingling with admiration. Harper raises an eyebrow, but doesn't comment on the unspoken dynamic. Harper.
Fine.
You'll go together. Take a small team and report back by nightfall. Elizabeth and Henry move silently through the dense forest, their footsteps muffled by the thick underbrush. The tension between them simmers beneath the surface, unspoken but palpable. After a while, Henry breaks the silence.
Henry.
You've been quiet. Elizabeth. Without looking at him, just focused. Henry. Lightly focused on avoiding me, you mean? Elizabeth stops abruptly, turning to face him. Elizabeth. Sharp. What do you want me to say, Henry? That I'm angry? That I'm scared every time we go out there, because I don't know if we'll both make it back? Henry takes a step closer, his voice steady, but filled with emotion. Henry, I want you to say whatever it is you're feeling. Even if it's anger, even if it's fear. I'll take it. Just don't shut me out. Elizabeth's expression softens, the walls she's built around herself beginning to crack. Elizabeth. Low voice. I'm not shutting you out. I'm trying to protect myself. Henry looks at her for a long moment, his eyes filled with understanding.
Henry.
I get it, but you don't have to do it alone. Before she can respond, a faint sound in the distance catches their attention. Elizabeth signals for silence, and they both crouch low, their weapons at the ready. In the distance, they spot a small group of enemy scouts moving through the trees. Elizabeth exchanges a glance with Henry, nodding toward a narrow trail that offers a vantage point. They move with practiced precision, flanking the enemy silently. As the scouts draw closer, Elizabeth whispers, Elizabeth, on my signal. Henry nods, his focus unwavering. Forest clearing moments later. Elizabeth and Henry ambush the scouts, taking them out swiftly and efficiently. When the last of the enemy falls, they take a moment to catch their breath. Henry, grinning, still a hell of a team. Elizabeth glances at him, her expression softening despite herself. Elizabeth.
Yeah, we are.
For a moment, the world around them fades, and it's just the two of them. The weight of unspoken words lingers, but for now, their connection is enough. Elizabeth.
Come on.
We've got a report to make. Elizabeth and Henry enter the command center, the tension between them still palpable. Reeves follows closely, watching them like a hawk. Inside, Commander Gray is standing over a holographic map of the battlefield. Commander Gray. To the group. Lieutenant Elizabeth. Captain Henry. Good you're here. Elizabeth and Henry exchange a quick glance before stepping forward. Commander Gray, pointing to the map. Our scouts have identified enemy movement near Ridgepoint. We need a small team to intercept and gather intel before they advance further. Reeves, cutting in. If I may, sir, I suggest Captain Henry lead the mission. He has the experience. Henry looks at Elizabeth, hesitation flickering in his eyes.
Henry.
I'll go, but I want Lieutenant Elizabeth on the team. She knows the terrain better than anyone. Commander Gray, raising an eyebrow. You sure about that, Captain? This mission requires focus, not distractions. Henry stiffens but doesn't respond. Elizabeth clears her throat. Elizabeth. Sir, I'm confident in my abilities. I won't let anything get in the way of the mission. Commander Gray studies them both for a moment, then nods. Commander Gray. Very well. You leave at dawn.
Dismissed.
Elizabeth walks briskly, her mind racing. Henry catches up to her, grabbing her arm gently. Henry. Elizabeth, wait. She stops but doesn't turn to face him. Elizabeth. What are you doing, Henry? You're putting both of us in danger.
Henry.
I'm protecting you. Elizabeth finally turns, her eyes flashing. Elizabeth. I don't need your protection, Henry. What I need is for you to trust that I can handle myself. Henry looks at her, his expression softening. Henry, it's not that I don't trust you. It's that I can't imagine what I'd do if something happened to you. Elizabeth's anger fades, replaced by a mixture of frustration and longing. Elizabeth. Henry, if we keep this up, we're going to get caught. Reeves is already suspicious. Henry. Stepping closer. Then let him be suspicious. I'm not going to pretend I don't care about you, Elizabeth. Before she can respond, footsteps echo down the hallway. They step apart just as Reeves rounds the corner, his gaze flicking between them. Reeves. Quietly. Interesting conversation. Henry. Flatly. Can we help you, Reeves? Reeves. Just reminding you both of the stakes. This mission isn't a game. He walks off, leaving Elizabeth and Henry alone again. Elizabeth. Whispering. He's going to report us. Henry. Softly. Let him. If this mission is successful, none of it will matter. The team, led by Henry and Elizabeth, moves silently through the dense forest. The air is tense, every rustle of leaves putting them on edge. As they near the ridge, Elizabeth spots movement in the distance. She signals for the team to halt. Elizabeth. Whispering. Enemy patrol. 3 o'clock. Henry nods, motioning for the team to spread out. As they set up their positions, Elizabeth feels Henry's presence beside her. Henry. Whispering. You good? Elizabeth. Always. Their eyes meet for a brief moment before they refocus on the mission. Suddenly, a twig snaps behind them. Elizabeth whirls around, her weapon at the ready, but it's too late. An enemy soldier lunges at her, knocking her weapon aside. Henry reacts instantly, taking out the soldier with a single, precise shot.
Henry.
Pulling her to her feet. You all right? Elizabeth nods, shaken but steady. Elizabeth. Let's finish this. Elizabeth and Henry move swiftly through the dense undergrowth, the sound of enemy soldiers shouting in the distance. They've been separated from the team for nearly an hour. Elizabeth. Quietly, checking her map. There's a narrow pass about half a mile east. If we make it there, we can circle back to the rendezvous point. Henry nods but doesn't speak. His jaw is set, his focus intense. Elizabeth glances at him, sensing the weight of his thoughts. Elizabeth. Softly. Stop blaming yourself.
Henry.
Not looking at her. I should have seen the ambush coming. Elizabeth. You can't anticipate everything, Henry. We're still alive, and we have the intel. That's what matters. Henry finally meets her gaze, and for a moment, the tension eases.
Henry.
You're right. Let's keep moving. They press on, but the sound of approaching footsteps forces them to duck into a rocky outcrop. Elizabeth peers out cautiously, spotting a patrol of 5 enemy soldiers. Elizabeth. Whispering. Too many to take head-on. Henry. We'll have to split them up. He scans the area and spots a fallen tree nearby. Grabbing a small rock, He throws it toward the tree, creating a loud crack as the rock strikes it. The soldiers pause, their weapons raised. Two of them break off to investigate.
Henry.
Whispering.
Now.
Elizabeth nods, and they move silently, taking out the remaining 3 soldiers with precision and speed. As they finish, Henry turns to Elizabeth, breathing heavily. Henry, you okay? Elizabeth, better than them. Despite the danger, a faint smile passes between them. They reach the pass, but it's more treacherous than the map suggested. The rocky path is narrow, with a steep drop on one side. Elizabeth pauses, assessing the terrain. Elizabeth, one wrong step, and we're done for. Henry steps onto the path first, testing the ground before motioning for her to follow. Henry, stay close. They inch along the pass, the sound of rushing water far below adding to the tension. Halfway across, the ground beneath Elizabeth shifts, sending loose rocks tumbling down the cliff. She stumbles, but Henry grabs her arm, pulling her to safety. Elizabeth, breathless. Thanks. Henry, grinning.
Told you to stay close.
Elizabeth rolls her eyes, but can't hide her relief. They finally reach the rendezvous point, where the rest of the team is waiting. Reeves steps forward, his expression unreadable. Reeves, took you long enough. We were starting to think you didn't make it. Elizabeth, deadpan. Nice to know you had so much faith in us. Reeves smirks, but says nothing. Henry steps forward, handing over the intel they recovered. Henry, here. Everything we found. Reeves takes the data chip, his eyes flicking between Henry and Elizabeth. Reeves, you two always seem to find trouble when you're together. Henry, as calmly as possible. We get the job done. Reeves studies them for a moment longer before nodding. Reeves, good work. Let's head back. Back at the base, Elizabeth sits alone in the barracks, replaying the events of the day in her mind. The weight of their close calls presses on her, but so does something else, the growing realization of how much Henry means to her. The door opens and Henry steps inside.
Henry.
Thought I'd find you here. Elizabeth looks up, her expression softening. Elizabeth. Couldn't sleep. Henry sits beside her, the silence between them heavy, but not uncomfortable.
Henry.
You were incredible out there today. Elizabeth. Smirking. Even when I almost fell off a cliff. Henry. Especially then. They both laugh quietly, the tension easing for the first time in hours. But as the laughter fades, the air between them shifts. Henry. Seriously? Elizabeth, I meant what I said earlier. I don't know what I'd do if something happened to you. Elizabeth looks at him, her heart pounding. Elizabeth.
Henry, we can't keep doing this.
Not here.
Not now.
Henry. Softly.
I know.
But that doesn't change how I feel. Elizabeth's resolve falters as she looks into his eyes. For a moment, the world outside fades, and all that matters is the two of them. Before she can stop herself, she leans in, her lips brushing his. It's a fleeting moment, but it's enough to change everything. As they pull apart, the weight of what just happened settles between them. Elizabeth, whispering, we're going to regret that. Henry, smiling faintly, maybe, but not tonight. Elizabeth and Henry sit on the edge of her bed, the room dimly lit by a flickering desk lamp. The weight of their situation hangs heavy in the air. Elizabeth, whispering, we can't keep doing this, Henry. If Harper suspects us, it's only a matter of time before he finds proof.
Henry,
leaning closer. And what's the alternative? Pretend we don't care about each other? Walk away like none of this ever mattered? Elizabeth looks away, torn. Henry gently tilts her chin back to face him. Henry, softly, I'd rather take the risk than lose you. Elizabeth, eyes glistening. You're not the one they'll court-martial. I am. They'll ruin me. Henry's jaw tightens. He looks at her, guilt and frustration etched on his face. Henry, then we make sure they don't find out. Elizabeth stands, pacing the room. Elizabeth.
How?
Harper's watching me like a hawk. Reeves is already spreading rumors. It's not just us they're after, it's everything we stand for. Henry rises and grabs her hand, stopping her pacing. Henry, then let's give them nothing to find. We keep our distance in public. We act like nothing's going on. But here, gestures to the room. This is ours. No one can take it from us. Elizabeth looks at him, torn between hope and fear. Finally, she nods. Elizabeth, sighing.
All right.
But if things get too dangerous, Henry, promise me you'll walk away. For both our sakes. Henry's face hardens.
Henry.
I'm not walking away, Elizabeth.
Not now.
Not ever. Before she can argue, there's another knock at the door. This time, it's softer, almost hesitant. Elizabeth and Henry exchange a nervous glance. Elizabeth, whispering.
Hide.
Henry quickly moves to the small alcove behind her wardrobe. Elizabeth straightens her uniform and opens the door. Standing in the dimly lit corridor is Lieutenant Reeves, a sly smirk on his face. Reeves, Lieutenant, working late, are we? Elizabeth, flatly. What do you want, Reeves? Reeves, smirking. Oh, nothing much. Just thought I'd drop by and see how you're holding up. Rumors are flying about you and a certain captain. I figured you'd want a friendly warning before they reach Harper. Elizabeth's expression doesn't waver. Elizabeth, I don't have time for your games, Reeves. Is that all? Reeves leans in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. Reeves, careful, Lieutenant. Secrets have a way of coming to light. And Harper? He's not as patient as I am. Elizabeth narrows her eyes, her fists clenching at her sides. Elizabeth, if you have proof, take it to him. Otherwise, get out of my way. Reeves chuckles, stepping back with a mock salute. Reeves, as you wish, ma'am. Sleep well. He walks off, leaving Elizabeth fuming. She shuts the door and leans against it, her breath shaky. Henry, stepping out. What did he mean by that? Elizabeth, angrily. He's bluffing. He has nothing. Henry, what if he's not? Elizabeth looks at him, her resolve faltering. Elizabeth, then we're out of time. Henry, quietly. What are you saying? Elizabeth walks to her desk, pulling out a small, worn envelope. She hands it to Henry. Elizabeth, I've been working on a contingency plan. If things go south, we leave. Together. Henry opens the envelope to find 2 forged travel permits and a map of the surrounding territories. His eyes widen in surprise. Henry, Elizabeth, this is treason. Elizabeth, flatly. So, is being with you. Henry looks at her, his expression shifting from shock to admiration. Henry, then we'd better make it count. A faint light seeps through the window, casting soft shadows across the room. Elizabeth sits at her desk, staring at the forged travel permits while Henry sleeps on the small cot in the corner. Her fingers absent-mindedly trace the edges of the map. Suddenly, there's another knock at the door. This time, it's urgent and unrelenting. Elizabeth freezes, her heart pounding. Henry stirs awake, instantly alert. Henry, whispering, "Who is it?" Elizabeth shakes her head, signaling for him to hide again. Henry quickly moves behind the wardrobe, his movements silent and precise. Elizabeth takes a deep breath, stands, and approaches the door. Elizabeth, wary. Who's there? Voice, OS. It's Harper. Open up. Elizabeth's blood runs cold. She glances toward the wardrobe, where Henry is concealed. After a moment of hesitation, she unlocks the door. Major Harper stands tall, flanked by 2 armed soldiers. His face is unreadable, but his eyes are sharp and searching. Harper, Lieutenant, apologies for the early hour. May I come in? Elizabeth, suppressing her nerves. Of course, sir. Harper steps inside, his gaze immediately sweeping over the room. The soldiers remain at the door, standing guard. Harper's eyes land on the desk, where the map and permits are still spread out. Elizabeth subtly moves to block his view. Harper, you've been busy. Elizabeth, just reviewing some patrol routes, sir. Is there something urgent? Harper takes a step closer, his imposing presence filling the small room. Harper, I've received reports that Captain Henry was seen in this area last night. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? Elizabeth. Steady voice.
No, sir.
I've been here alone all night. Harper's gaze hardens. He takes another step, now towering over her. Harper, you're a skilled officer, Lieutenant. But lies have a way of catching up to people. If you know something, now's the time to speak up. Elizabeth holds his gaze, unwavering. Elizabeth, I don't have anything to report, sir. Harper studies her for a long moment, then nods toward the wardrobe. Harper, search it. Elizabeth's stomach drops as one of the soldiers steps forward. She feels the world slow as the soldier reaches for the wardrobe door. Henry braces himself on the other side, his hand resting on his sidearm, prepared for the worst. Elizabeth, sir, with all due respect. Before she can finish, a commotion erupts from the hallway. A young private runs in, saluting sharply. Private, Major Harper, sir. There's been an incident at the eastern perimeter. Your immediate attention is required. Harper scowls, clearly frustrated, but he turns to the private. Harper, I'll be there shortly. He glances back at Elizabeth, his expression unreadable. Harper, we'll continue this conversation later, Lieutenant. He motions for the soldiers to follow him, and they leave. Elizabeth waits until their footsteps fade before collapsing against the door, her breath shaky.
Henry.
Stepping out, whispering. That was too close. Elizabeth. Urgent. We can't wait any longer, Henry. We leave tonight. Henry. Are you sure? Elizabeth. If they find us, we're finished. We stick to the plan. Henry nods, his resolve hardening. Elizabeth and Henry move silently through the shadows, their packs slung over their shoulders. The base is eerily quiet, the faint hum of patrol vehicles the only sound. They approach a hole in the fence, hidden by overgrown bushes. Elizabeth kneels, carefully prying back the wires she had loosened days before. Henry keeps watch, his hand on his weapon. Henry, whispering, hurry. Elizabeth nods, slipping through the gap. She motions for Henry to follow, but as he does, a spotlight sweeps over them. A sharp alarm pierces the night air. Voice OS. Halt. Intruders at the perimeter. Henry grabs Elizabeth's hand, and they sprint into the darkness. Shouts echo behind them as soldiers give chase. Elizabeth and Henry crash through the dense underbrush, their breaths ragged. The sound of pursuit grows fainter, but they know it's not over. They finally stop in a small clearing, gasping for air. Elizabeth, whispering, we're not far from the rendezvous point. Henry nods, scanning their surroundings. Henry, we'll make it. We have to. Elizabeth looks at him, her fear momentarily replaced by determination. Elizabeth, no matter what happens, we stick together. Henry takes her hand, squeezing it tightly. Henry, always. The sun is obscured by smoke, the sky a dull orange as explosions rock the ground. Henry and Elizabeth crouch behind a crumbled wall, their breaths heavy with adrenaline. The sound of gunfire is constant, filling the air with tension. They exchange a quick glance, their bond forged in the heat of battle. Henry, whispering, eyes scanning the horizon. We need to move. The east flank is compromised. Elizabeth, nodding, adjusting her gear. I've got your 6. She peers through the sights of her rifle, taking down an enemy soldier with a clean shot. The precision of her movements shows years of training, a testament to her resilience. Henry's heart pounds with admiration and concern. Suddenly, a grenade lands near their position, the countdown ticking down. Elizabeth reacts instantly, grabbing Henry by the arm and pulling him down into a tight roll, just as the explosion rips through the air. The force sends them tumbling, but they land in a relatively safe spot. Henry, voice strained, looking at Elizabeth. You okay? Elizabeth, with a smirk, brushing off dirt from her jacket. I'm still standing. The ground beneath them shakes again, and another round of gunfire erupts. Henry presses his back against the wall, checking his ammo. Henry, quietly determined, we push through. We don't let them win. Elizabeth glances at him, her eyes burning with the same fire that drives him. They've been through hell together, and this fight is no different. She nods. Elizabeth, softly, but with fierce resolve. Together, always. The soft hum of the field hospital is filled with the distant sound of soldiers moving and murmuring, but in this small corner of the room, it's just the two of them. Henry, his face bruised and pale from his injuries, looks up at Elizabeth with quiet intensity. The blood from his wounds has been cleaned, but the pain still lingers in his eyes. Elizabeth, on the other hand, is a picture of exhaustion, her face weary, but her grip on his hand is firm, a silent promise. Elizabeth, softly, you were reckless. Henry, smiling weakly, I couldn't let you go, not without a fight. Her fingers brush his cheek, tenderly tracing the path of his injury. Their closeness, the comfort they find in each other, seems to push away the chaos of the war outside. As they kiss, the weight of everything they've been through, all the loss, the battles, the survival, hangs between them like an unspoken bond. Nearby, standing just beyond the curtain that separates the makeshift wards, Reeves watches. His gaze flickers between the couple and the rest of the wounded soldiers, the unshed emotions he has kept buried for so long threatening to rise to the surface. There's a tension in his jaw, a storm brewing behind his eyes. Reeves, whispering to himself, he's saved her. But at what cost? The guilt weighs heavily on him. Reeves had been the one to ask Henry to cover Elizabeth that day, to watch over her in the field. And now, seeing the way Henry has risked his life, he can't help but feel responsible. As the hours pass, Reeves finally finds himself at the edge of the cot where Henry lies, still holding Elizabeth's hand. Reeves, quietly, she needs you, Henry, but you both need to survive this war first. Henry shifts, blinking at Reeves in confusion.
Henry,
Hoarsely,
what are you talking about?
Reeves, you're not out of the woods yet. You'll need rest if you're going to get through this. And Elizabeth, she's stronger than you think, but don't let her carry it all. Elizabeth, overhearing the conversation, looks up. There's a flicker of understanding in her eyes, but also something like sorrow. Elizabeth, softly to Reeves, we don't have time for promises. Just help him. Reeves hesitates, but nods solemnly, realizing that he can only offer his support in small ways now. The war has taken so much from all of them. Later that night, as the soft glow of the lanterns flickers and the distant sounds of battle echo through the walls of the field hospital, Henry and Elizabeth lay side by side, their fingers intertwined. The world outside may be fractured, but for this brief, fragile moment, they have each other. Elizabeth, whispering, promise me something, Henry. Henry, anything. Elizabeth, if we make it out of here, we'll build a life together, away from all of this. Henry's lips curl into a weak smile, a glimmer of hope in his eyes despite the uncertainty around them.
Henry,
I promise. Field Hospital dawn. The first light of dawn creeps through the canvas windows of the field hospital. The steady, rhythmic breathing of the soldiers mingles with the distant sounds of the battlefront. Henry, despite his injuries, stirs on the cot, his body protesting with every movement. Elizabeth is awake beside him, her eyes heavy with fatigue but alert, ever watchful of the man who saved her life. Henry, softly groaning, I thought I was done for last night. Elizabeth, smiling, you're still here, and that's all that matters. She helps him adjust his position, making sure he's comfortable despite the limited resources available in the makeshift hospital. She watches him with a mixture of concern and admiration, knowing how close they came to losing everything. Just as Henry closes his eyes to rest, the sound of boots echoes in the corridor, and a familiar face appears at the curtain. It's Captain Daniels, their commanding officer, looking as grim as ever. Captain Daniels. Serious. We need to talk. Elizabeth stands, sensing the tension in the air. She exchanges a glance with Henry, who struggles to sit up, his face tightening in pain but not showing any sign of backing down. Daniels steps closer, his gaze flickering to the both of them before landing on Henry. Captain Daniels. Quietly, we've received new orders. The front lines are shifting. We're moving out in 2 days. Henry. Weakly. How many of us are still standing? Captain Daniels. Gravely. Not enough. But we can't afford to lose any more time. We're regrouping, and you're going to need to be on your feet. We can't leave anyone behind. Henry's eyes lock with Daniels, understanding the weight of the decision they both have to face. He knows his body isn't fully healed, and the thought of fighting again so soon fills him with dread. But it's the reality they live in now: survival, duty, sacrifice. Henry. Quietly. Elizabeth, you can't come with us. Elizabeth flinches at the words, but she doesn't protest. She's heard this before, from Henry and from others, but it doesn't make it easier to accept. Elizabeth. Softly. I'm not going anywhere. Henry shakes his head, his voice firm despite his weakened state. He knows it's for her safety, but deep down, he knows she won't back down either. They're both in this together, for better or worse. Henry. Struggling to sit up. I can't do this without you. Elizabeth kneels beside him, taking his hand once more. Elizabeth. Then we'll do it together. Captain Daniels watches the exchange, a slight frown on his face. He's seen the bond between them, and he knows it's both a strength and a vulnerability. He can't afford to lose them, but he also knows that their bond might be their greatest asset in the chaos of war. Captain Daniels. Sighing. You're both stubborn, but I can't argue with that. We leave in 2 days. Make whatever preparations you need, but don't delay. As Daniels turns and leaves, Reeves appears from behind the curtain. His expression is unreadable, but the strain on his face is evident. Reeves. Quietly. You both know what that means, right? We're moving to the front lines. It's not just about survival anymore. Elizabeth. Firmly. It's about making sure we don't lose any more of us. Reeves nods, his shoulders heavy with the weight of the words they all know but refuse to speak out loud. He sits down beside them, his voice low. Reeves. You've been through hell already. Don't make the mistake of thinking it's over. Henry. Weakly, but with resolve. We don't have a choice. Harper. Muttering to himself. I wish there was another way. A knock on the door. Harper doesn't look up. Harper.
Come in.
The door opens and Lieutenant Carter, a seasoned officer, steps inside. His expression is unreadable, but there's a subtle tension in his posture. Carter. Sir, I've got an update on the situation with Henry and Elizabeth. We've reviewed the mission logs. They've been covering for each other during field operations. Harper's eyes narrow. Harper. I'm aware, but I need to know if their actions were out of line, or if it's just a matter of personal bias. Carter. It's not just bias, sir. They've been making decisions without consulting the team, taking risks that don't align with the unit's objectives. Harper leans back in his chair, the decision weighing heavily on him. Harper. I see. And if I make the reassignment, what happens to their partnership? Carter. Pauses. They'll likely be broken. But Henry's loyalty to Elizabeth is unwavering. That might affect his judgment in the field. Harper. Sighs. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. There's a long silence between them. Carter steps forward, his tone softening. Carter. They're both good soldiers, sir. Perhaps the issue isn't with their actions, but with how we handle their commitment to each other. Harper looks up at Carter, considering his words. Harper. Firmly. I don't have the luxury of sentiment. The unit's success is all that matters. But even as he says it, Harper wonders if there's a balance to be found between duty and personal loyalty. In the barracks, Henry and Elizabeth sit together, their voices low but intense.
Henry.
We've crossed a line, Elizabeth. You heard what Harper said. Elizabeth. Her voice shaky.
We didn't have a choice.
You saw what they were asking us to do. The mission, it wasn't right.
Henry.
And yet, here we are, fighting for our place in a world that doesn't care about our reasons. Elizabeth places her hand on his. Elizabeth. What do we do now?
Henry.
Jameson. Sir, we've got a situation. We've received intel on a potential breach of security. I need your decision on Henry and Elizabeth before I send them into the field. Harper rises from his chair and faces Jameson, a sense of inevitability settling over him. Harper, what's the situation? Jameson, intel suggests that the enemy has infiltrated our ranks. We need the best operatives to handle this. It's a delicate operation, sir. We can't afford to have any distractions. Harper stares at her for a moment, weighing the consequences of his next words. He has to choose between maintaining order and allowing for the loyalty that has already been tested. Harper pauses, then decisively. I'll allow Henry and Elizabeth to lead the operation, but if they slip up again, it's over. Do you understand me? Jameson,
Nodding.
understood, sir. Harper watches her leave, the tension in the air thickening. This mission could be their redemption or their downfall. The team is on high alert as they move through the dimly lit streets, weapons drawn, eyes scanning the surroundings. Henry and Elizabeth lead the group, moving in sync with an almost unspoken connection. They've trained for moments like this, but tonight feels different. The stakes are higher. The pressure is undeniable. Elizabeth, whispering to Henry, stay close. We need to make it through this without any mistakes.
Henry.
Low, determined. I've got your back. Always. They move in silence, each step calculated. The unit follows their lead, trust hanging heavy in the air. They've earned their place, but the doubt remains. If they fail tonight, it could be the end of their careers. Henry, handing Elizabeth a small device. This will track their movements. We'll know where they're heading before they even know we're here. Elizabeth.
Good.
Let's stay ahead of them. Suddenly, a low rumble shakes the ground beneath their feet. The tension spikes. The team freezes, waiting for orders. Jameson, over comms. Report. Henry, quick, scanning the area. It's a trap. They know we're here. Elizabeth, sharply, to Henry, get the device online. We need to stay 2 steps ahead. Henry begins working quickly, while Elizabeth takes the lead, guiding the team through the shadows. The ambush is swift. Gunfire erupts from the shadows, and the team is immediately thrown into chaos. Elizabeth returns fire while Henry works to get the data they need. The bullets fly fast, but their training keeps them alive. Henry's focus never wavers as he plugs into the system and begins sending intel back to the command center. Henry, gritting his teeth. We've got eyes on their movements. I'm feeding it to you now. Jameson, over comms. Stay sharp. We need a clear exit plan. Elizabeth, commanding.
Move.
Keep the perimeter secure. As the firefight continues, Elizabeth's eyes catch sight of a figure moving in the distance, someone from the enemy's ranks. She motions for the team to stay down and gestures to Henry, signaling him to move. Elizabeth, whispering urgent, get to the high ground. We'll flank them from above. Henry nods, quickly moving to her side. Together, they lead the charge, pushing forward with precision and speed. The team follows, their trust in their leaders unwavering. Back at the command center, Harper and Jameson watch the live feed, their eyes glued to the screen. Harper's fingers drum lightly on the desk, anxiety creeping in despite his attempts to remain composed. Harper, under his breath. Come on, Henry. Elizabeth, prove me right. Jameson stands beside him, arms crossed, watching the data come in. Jameson, if they get through this, sir, they'll earn their place. The situation escalates. They're surrounded, but the team, under Henry and Elizabeth's leadership, is handling it with remarkable precision. The tide turns as the enemy's weak points are exposed, thanks to their strategy. A final flurry of gunfire, and then silence. Henry, breathing heavily over comms.
Clear.
We've got the intel, and the area is secured. Elizabeth, smiling slightly. It's done. As the team regroups, the weight of the operation finally hits them. It wasn't easy. They've earned their place for now. But the tension isn't gone. Not by a long shot. Harper stands at the window, the weight of the decision pressing on him. The operation was a success. Henry and Elizabeth proved their worth at least for today. But can he truly allow their bond to continue to shape their missions? A knock interrupts his thoughts. Harper.
Come in.
Henry and Elizabeth enter, their faces weary but victorious. Harper turns to face them, his expression unreadable. Harper, you've earned this round, but understand this: your loyalty is both a strength and a liability. One more misstep, and I won't hesitate. Henry and Elizabeth nod, their resolve firm. Henry, understood, sir. We'll continue to prove we're worth the risk. Elizabeth, softly, we'll do whatever it takes to protect this unit. Together. Harper watches them both for a moment longer, the decision still gnawing at him. But for now, they've earned a temporary reprieve. Harper, then prove it. Every mission, every day. No excuses. As they leave, the door closing behind them, Harper remains standing at the window. He's not sure if he's made the right choice, but one thing is clear: the journey for Henry and Elizabeth is far from over. And so is his.